Good morning. My name is Leanne Caret, and on behalf of the Boeing Company, I wanted to share what an honor it is to be here today. It is inspiring and gratifying to be united alongside you as we work towards this common goal, advancing the well-being of our veterans who have given so much of themselves to our great nation. Every day, I see the extraordinary dedication, talent, and leadership of our servicemen and women. I am even more blessed that I have the opportunity to see them firsthand following their formal service time. The truth is, veterans never stop serving. They may no longer wear a uniform, but the selflessness and character that defines military life never disappears, no matter what comes next in their lives and careers. We believe veterans deserve our society's highest respect, and we're committed to ensure they are given every opportunity to thrive and remain healthy in their civilian lives. We are grateful to President Bush and Mrs. Bush for making this a centerpiece of their post-presidential work and are honored to participate. In a moment, we will hear from the Honorable David Shulkin, Secretary of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and joining him to serve as the moderator of this morning's discussion is military journalist and author Bryan Bender. Secretary Shulkin was unanimously confirmed for this role by the Senate on February 13, 2017. He brought years of experience serving as Undersecretary of Veterans Affairs for Health with the VA, as well as from his distinguished career as a medical doctor, professor, and leader in the field of healthcare. Bryan Bender is the defense editor of Politico. He previously worked for the Boston Globe and Jane's Defense Weekly, covering military operations around the globe. He is also the author of the book, You Are Not Forgotten, the story of an Iraq veteran search for a missing World War II pilot in the South Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my great honor to welcome the 9th Secretary of Veteran Affairs, the Honorable David Shulkin, and our moderator, journalist Bryan Bender. Thank you.
Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for coming and joining us here at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. As you heard, my name is Bryan Bender. I'm the defense editor at Politico, and we're glad that you could join us here for Politico's first interview of the day here at the Bush Institute's Stand 2 National Veterans Convening. I will be moderating a one-on-one conversation with Secretary Shulkin to get some of the administration's views on veterans issues going forward. And later this afternoon, along with my colleague Kimberly Helfing, our senior education writer, we will also have a conversation with Congressman Tim Walz and Senator Boozman, both on the Veterans Affairs Committees, to get a congressional perspective. Just a programming note, if you want to join the conversation on Twitter, because we can't do anything these days without Twitter, of course, the hashtag is Stand2. So please, those in the audience, those at home, please join the conversation. And then just one last note, special thanks to Starbucks, our sponsor for the event here this morning, which probably got us here this morning, at least some of us. And so without delay, let's get the conversation going. Again, welcome to Dr. David Shulkin, the Secretary of Veterans Affairs.
Thank you.
Maybe we'll start out, Mr. Secretary, talking about an issue that a lot of people in the audience care about, and that is veterans employment. For obvious reasons, the VA focuses a lot on providing health services to veterans. But could you tell us a little bit about your view, your objectives in using the VA and its convening power, its budget, to try and do a better job of connecting veterans to society, connecting them to meaningful jobs, as the president said? Should the VA be doing more in terms of programs, or should the VA be more of an integrator of what's already out there in the nonprofit world, et cetera?
Well, you mentioned that a lot of VA's focus has been on healthcare, and we've been changing the way that we think about healthcare to focus not so much on disease, but on well-being. And when you think about the well-being of our veterans, you have to think about employment, because one of the things that we've learned is the most powerful predictor of outcome and success and well-being is meaningful fulfillment in life, and part of that is the ability to be able to give back and to work. And so a lot of our work recently has been in connecting veterans during this period of transition and finding meaningful ways for them to give back. As you know, we've prioritized veterans' homelessness, and we've made great progress. But if you don't connect people back with a way to sustainably maintain themselves, they fall back into homelessness. In many of our areas that we work in emotional health and the invisible wounds of war, as the president was talking about, it really is connecting people back in with work. So our vocational rehab programs are really important, and connecting with community organizations and being part of the community to get veterans connected with the right resources is really important.
We're the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and obviously a lot of those in the audience come from corporate America, some of those places that are doing a very good job already of hiring veterans. But can you talk a little bit about maybe some things the government can do to further incentivize companies, not just to hire veterans, but possibly tax credits, as some have suggested, for those who hire reservists, who might get called up to active duty, go off for some months, and basically companies now just have to kind of deal with that person not there. But are there things the government can do, that Congress can do, to incentivize corporate America to do more?
Yeah. Well, I think the overall good news is, because of the work and so many of the people in this audience that are part of organizations, the secret is no longer a secret that veterans are really among the most preferred employees that corporations can hire. Veterans are terrific entrepreneurs. They're starting businesses and companies all over the place. Back after 2001, the unemployment rate among veterans was 10.7%, higher than the average population. Today, veteran employment is lower than the average population. It's 3.7%. And companies, frankly, are struggling to find enough veterans to hire. You know, through the Hiring Our Heroes program, 1,536 companies have committed to hiring over 1 million veterans. There are about 600,000 now who have found veterans to hire, and many, many more looking how they can identify such a talented pool of people to come and join their organization. So while the government can do more, I think that we are really quite successful. When you hear Flo and Michael and Fontaine, as the president said, who wouldn't want them to be part of their organizations? And so I think that we found the successful recipe here. It really is to connect people to do work like the Bush Institute's doing, to provide leadership skills, to be able to make those connections. Our younger veteran service groups are providing those types of skills. So I think we've really found something that's working already.
I ask you on that, does the VA have data, or do you get a sense of what kinds of jobs veterans are getting? I mean, it looks like the overall numbers are good. But as the president mentioned, you know, and I think stressed, meaningful employment. In other words, not just a job, but something with a future, something they feel like can really be their new life as they integrate back into society. Do you have a sense of that? Is that something that you've looked at?
Well, I think that it is something that, again, the Bush Institute has identified a really key issue here, and that is leadership training and mentoring, and especially this peer-to-peer mentoring. And that's what you see so many of our younger veteran groups doing, which is really connecting people who want to be part of their communities, who want to be leaders, because the military really does provide leadership skills. And so while people may enter organizations at various levels, it's really those first 4 to 5 years when you enter an organization that you begin to set your path on whether you're going to advance in that organization. And so I think it's the mentoring leadership skills that are key, and having a coach and having somebody who can help advise you on the best ways that you can contribute, because we know about our veterans that they tend to be much more involved and engaged in their community, and people look up to them, and they tend to be natural leaders. And so it doesn't surprise me when I see in organizations increasingly that it's veterans who are rising to the senior ranks and going on to be chief executives.
Sort of a broader question about veterans and their challenges in reintegrating with society. As we know, less than 1% of American men and women serve in the military, volunteer to serve in the military. How concerned are you that as America's conflicts have dragged on for more than a decade and a half now, post 9/11, that you have a country that is by and large disconnected from the military itself, from military families, from veterans? Don't really fully comprehend what they go through, the struggles that they undergo. If they do know, perhaps they're getting not a comprehensive picture of it. Are there things that someone at your level can do in terms of trying to connect the country at large a little bit more with what some would argue is almost a Praetorian Guard? It's a very, narrow set of people who sort of live in their own world oftentimes and feel that it's really hard to come back to society and really be understood.
Yeah. I'm very concerned about the increasing military-civilian divide. We talked about this a little bit last night with the president, and work's being done at Syracuse University to really try to understand this. But with 0.8% of our population now serving, we have many, many American families who don't even know people who have served or are currently in the military and don't understand what I've had the privilege as Secretary of understanding about the tremendous commitment that not only these young men and women give when they go off to serve their country, but their entire family gives when they go off to serve. And so part of our responsibility at VA and so many of our community groups is to make sure that we let people know about not only what these young men and women do when they raise their hand to protect our country, but what our responsibility is as a country to them, not only when they go off to conflict, but when they come back. And I think that is one of the roles that we see. And, we learn a lot by looking at other countries. When you take a look at countries, and I'm thinking, in particular where everybody in the country serves, like a country like Israel, you do not see so many of the problems when people come back with emotional or invisible wounds of war, because everybody around them understands. So they have a built-in network where most families have somebody who serves, so that the community understands. And I think what happens here is people return, and except for fellow veterans, most people around them in work and in their life don't understand what they're going through. So I think that we have to do a much better job of getting people in the country to understand how they can support our veterans when they return.
Maybe we can switch gears a little bit and talk about what you probably know best, which is health, which is a huge role that the VA plays. Maybe we can start with the Choice Act, which, as many of us know, is fairly recent legislation that tries to take a little bit of the burden off the VA and help veterans who may not be close to a VA facility or clinic to get care, to get good care, and to do it through the private system, through a voucher program. That was just recently renewed by the Congress for some period of time. There's some question about whether there's enough money to fund that. And so can you talk a little bit about just how it's been working, number one, but also where you see that going? Is that a model for perhaps a much larger program where you have kind of a public-private system overall that relies on perhaps the VA health system for certain things, but then provides government subsidies for veterans to go to their family doctor if that's what they want to do, regardless of where they live?
Well, the origins of the choice program started with the VA crisis in April 2014, where it became known that the demand for services was much greater than the supply of services in VA, and Congress came up with the choice program legislation. I think the most important thing that we learned from that was that VA can't do this alone, that VA needs to work with the broader community in healthcare and outside of healthcare if we're going to really do and uphold our responsibility to our veterans. Congress, of course, designed the program, and they designed it in a way that had two problems. One was it was amazingly complex, so that veterans didn't understand how to access the program.
I can't imagine that it was
right.
complex.
And the people who worked in the VA didn't understand how to work the program. So very few veterans in the beginning were actually getting help. They were just getting frustrated. Secondly, they designed the program around administrative rules. The way you could access care is if you lived 40 miles away from a primary care doctor in the VA, or if you waited more than 30 days. And so what we've now proposed in order to continue the ability to access care into the community is two things. One is dramatically simplify the program so that people understand it. And secondly, get rid of administrative rules and create a clinical system of care. And that's what a healthcare system should be doing. So we're working now with Congress to redesign this program to make sure that it works. But we are committed, as President Bush said, to focus on what works for veterans. And what I think is clear what works for veterans is you take the best of what VA does, because VA is doing terrific work in many areas, and you take the best of what the private sector does, and you allow the veteran to be able to access services in an integrated fashion so that you don't experience the gaps in care that many in the private sector experience, where doctors aren't talking to each other, we're not sharing information, and so people get caught in these gaps. But if you can create an integrated system between the private sector and the VA, I think veterans will benefit the most from that type of system.
Obviously, directly linked to the health of veterans long-term are disability benefits for those who have been wounded, those who are dealing with long-term health problems from their service. But the disability system as it's structured, as I understand it, has not been changed very much at all for decades, really. So I'm wondering if that is an issue that you've started to look at as well. In other words, we live in an era where a veteran who might have, God forbid, lost a limb or had a lifelong injury like that could still be fully employed in a digital economy. Could still live a full life in a way perhaps that a generation or two ago a veteran could not. Does that beg the question of, well, is our disability system, the payment structure, the compensation structure, is it up to date enough? And should it include new things, wellness programs, for example, that try to help veterans longer term live a fuller life as opposed to just writing them a check? Yeah.
One of the challenges that I faced coming into government from the private sector, not getting an education in Washington, is the challenge that it is to suggest new ideas that may potentially be viewed as a takeaway from current benefits. That's extremely hard to do in Washington. So I think you have to start with that everybody recognizes that we have a responsibility as a country to provide and to be able to supplement resources for veterans that were harmed or injured during their time of duty. And I don't think anybody's suggesting that we take away our commitment to that. But to suggest that there's not a better way to do things, I think is also wrong. And so I believe our current disability system that is designed from 50, 60, 70 years ago, I would suggest that it's not sustainable, and it may not be achieving the results of well-being for our veterans. Our system incentivizes disability when our system should be incentivizing health and well-being. And so I do believe that we do need to begin to start having a discussion and a dialogue, not so much about withdrawing our commitment, but how can we essentially enhance the outcomes of our system to help people. And this is going to be a very difficult discussion to have, because this is one that I worry that, if not done well, could become politicized. Imagine that. But, you know, VA has really done a great job in keeping itself in a bipartisan dialogue. And I am committed to making sure that VA and veterans don't become part of the political discussion, but more part of how do we do what we do better? How do we accomplish our mission better? So I think that rethinking how we could approach disability is a key topic that's going to be very important in the future years.
We've heard a lot this morning, or we've certainly been focused on post-9/11 veterans, as we heard from some of them this morning. But as you know, the median age of an American veteran, of the 22 American military veterans, is, I think, 55. And so the largest population is an aging one. And obviously that is not dissimilar from an issue we're dealing with as a country, the so-called silver tsunami, as the baby boomers age and need more health care, need more services. Is the VA prepared for that, in the sense of enough facilities, enough doctors? Because it seems like we're entering a period where, for the next 20, 30 years, the Vietnam era veterans, Cold War era veterans, are really going to be a strain on the system. And you don't hear a whole lot about that. Or it doesn't seem to me that there's a laser-like focus on that issue. Are we prepared? What are we doing? What do we need to be doing more of?
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. First of all, the VA tends to see issues in American healthcare before the rest of the healthcare system sees it. And it's exactly what we are seeing now. The crisis in 2014, many people related directly to our returning younger veterans, but in actuality, most of our demand was our Vietnam veterans growing older and requiring more services. And so while the number of veterans is projected to actually decline in the next 20 to 30 years, pending a new major conflict, our demand for services actually is expected to go up. And so our focus is on how do we prepare to meet that demand. I think one could traditionally think of that as building more hospitals and capabilities in medicine and more long-term care facilities. But as you know, healthcare is changing and the models of care are changing. And so we're looking at how do we actually help people remain in their homes? How do we help them stay healthy and avoid the need for complex care that takes place in hospitals and institutions? So we're increasingly trying to change our medical model and rely more upon technologies like telehealth and technologies that can help people maintain their normal environments in their home environments. And we're looking at how do we support structures like caregivers. And right now, legislatively, VA is able to provide caregivers to post-9/11 veterans, which is a terrific program that we have. But what we want to do is expand that so that we can provide caregiver support to those that are older, because if we can keep people healthy and safe at home, that's really the environment that they want to be in and we want them to be in. And it's also a cost-effective solution. So we're doing a number of things in our approach to the growing age of our veteran population. And I think that you're going to see new advances coming out as we begin to look at tools that will help our veterans stay healthy at home.
One last question on veterans' health, and and of course all of this is connected with employment and reintegrating into society in a meaningful way, finding a new life. A little bit of a controversial question, but as I know you're aware, the American Legion, one of the oldest, or certainly largest veterans organizations, not necessarily representative of the 9/11 generation, has been appealing to President Trump to reclassify, or at least consider reclassifying cannabis, marijuana, so that the federal government could study its potential therapeutic properties for PTS. And I'm going to start calling it PTS, not PTSD. And as I said, a controversial issue. Clearly, the government would have to go through some very significant steps to get to the point where federal research could be done. But you yourself said you think the VA needs to do what works. And we don't really know if that works, but there is certainly, as I think you would agree, some indications that in a very controlled environment could possibly supplement some of the drugs, some of the therapies that are currently being used, but some would argue are not really working. I mean, we still have 20 veterans a day killing themselves. Every time I see that statistic, I'm shocked each time. It's one of those few things that will shock you each time you hear it. So what is your view as a medical doctor? Do you think the government should study it, or at least begin to see whether there might be something there?
Well, our top priority, the only clinical priority that we focus on right now as our top priority, is the prevention of veteran suicide. And we are taking the approach that until we can see results that are decreasing that number and getting it to zero, we have to be open to new ideas that are out there or therapies that may help. I wish that I thought it was going to be a simple one pill is going to fix this. I don't believe that's going to happen. I believe that this is going to be a multifactorial approach, which means that we have to be open to all sorts of new ideas. Now, the issue of medical marijuana from the federal government point of view is one that right now we are prohibited by law from doing research on it or prescribing it. So this is an area where actually the states are going to be leading in this, because as it is increasingly being, laws are being passed at the state level to use medical marijuana, we are seeing increasingly not only more clinical data coming out, but we are seeing more research that's being done. And so as a physician scientist, I am extremely interested in learning from that data and trying to see, is this something that could help and could help veterans? But in this case, we are not going to be out there doing that research or prescribing these different medicinal preparations unless the law's changed.
Gotcha. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you about some news of the day, and we heard about this morning. You will be at the White House later as the president signs the VA Accountability and Whistleblower Protection Act, something that I think members of both parties have wanted for a long time. That gives you some more power, some more authority to make management changes at the VA. Can you give us a sense of where your head is about how you will go forward using some of that new authority?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm grateful to Congress and the President for moving forward with this. And you do see, this is an example where there is bipartisan support to help us fix issues that we know have been broken for a long time. And the basic issue is that in order to work in the VA, I believe it is an honor and a privilege to be able to serve. And there are, in small numbers of cases, employees that have forgotten that and clearly have lost their commitment to the values that we hold dear. And when you let people stay in an organization who are not demonstrating those values, that decreases the morale and takes away the motivation for the vast, vast majority of our employees who, as President Bush said, are overwhelmingly people that we're proud of and the greatest professionals that I've seen working in healthcare in my career. So I believe that to be able to move people out who have lost their way is going to be part of the solution in fixing the VA. And in fact, without that, without the ability to get the right people in these jobs and the right people in our leadership positions, I don't think we're going to be able to reform the VA. So this, to me, today is an important day. It's good news for veterans and their families. It's good news for our employees, because we need to make sure that everybody who's working in the VA is there for the right reasons. I don't think that this is going to be something that is abused. I take it seriously that everyone deserves due process, and we're going to make sure that that due process exists. But when we find evidence, and we've seen a lot of cases recently in the press that have just been so frustrating that we remove the employee and the Merit System Protection Board judges bring those employees back, you just shake your head at those cases. So after today, I think we're going to be able to change that course in VA, and it will be a positive step forward.
You mentioned bipartisanship, and I think we would all agree that the veterans issue these days seems to be one of the very few areas where members of both parties can get together and try to get things done. This afternoon, as I mentioned, we will have a bipartisan duo up here from the Senate and the House on the Veterans Affairs Committees. What are a couple things you would ask them? What can Congress do in the near term, not long term, but in this Congress? Are there things that Congress can do to help you tackle some of these challenges, and what are some of those?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's really important that we give the message to Congress how important it is that they stay focused on what's right for veterans and don't create a partisan issue over VA. And when you see what's happening in the rest of Washington right now, you can imagine the pressures on our elected members to turn everything into a political issue. So I am very, very proud, particularly of those who serve in our committees, some of the leaders you're going to be talking to today, that they've been able to resist those forces and really stay focused on veterans issues. We're looking out of the Senate right now for them to pass our Appeals Modernization Act. You talked about policy and law that hasn't been updated in a while. Our appeals laws haven't been updated since the 1930s, and it now takes, on average, 6 years to get a decision. If you were to file an appeal today on a disability claim, it will take you 6 years to get a decision. Without a change in the law, we're not going to get that fixed. The House has passed it. We're waiting for the Senate. We are looking for a solution from Congress to help us find solutions for our choice funding problems. And the good news is that we're getting more veterans than ever getting care that they need out in the community and in the VA, but that has actually accelerated our spend rate in the choice program. So we're looking for some help there, and we're looking for legislation that will make the choice program work even better for veterans in the future, like we were talking about. We're also looking for support to modernize the VA. I think most Americans would be surprised to know that our financial systems are running on COBOL technology. The last time people used COBOL as a programming language was in the 1970s. Our scheduling systems are MS-DOS, those blue screens that I was using 30 years ago when I first got my first PC. Our buildings, on average, are over 60 years old. We have 450 buildings from the Civil and Revolutionary Wars. And so what we really need to do is to modernize our system, because our veterans deserve better than we've been giving them. It's why I announced recently that the VA will be leaving its homegrown electronic medical record, over 35 years old, to the Department of Defense's electronic medical record, so that the first time we will have a modern, off-the-shelf system from the time you enlist through long-term or end-of-life care. And thank you. And we need Congress to step up and support those types of initiatives. These aren't cheap, but in the long run, this is when you send somebody off to war or to conflict, you have already committed to a lifetime of responsibility. And this is part of our country's responsibility, and not making these investments is simply not responsible.
Last question before I think we're out of time. Is there a capital improvement plan in the works at the VA? In other words, what does this cost? And how do we as a country pay for it?
The VA has, for years, not gotten the types of resources that it's needed. So we have a $50 billion capital deficit. And that simply can't be addressed overnight. So what I have announced is that we have 1,100 vacant and underutilized buildings. And I've said in the next 2 years, I have a plan to essentially get rid of vacant and underutilized facilities. I want the ability to take those resources, invest them back in the VA. That's going to mean we're going to need a different type of footprint. And I'll just give you one example as we close here. We had announced that we were going to build a new hospital in Omaha, Nebraska. It took us about 5 years to get that plan going. And we wanted to build a new hospital for $560 million in Omaha, Nebraska, a new bed tower. And of course, as you know, healthcare is changing. You don't need as many hospital beds anymore. Most care is now ambulatory. So we took the 10% of money that was given to us for design fees, $56 million, to plan the new hospital. And instead of planning a new hospital bed, we took the $56 million. We worked with the community in Omaha, Nebraska, a private-public partnership. And the community donated another $40 million, and now we're building a state-of-the-art ambulatory facility for $96 million, so using 10% of taxpayer dollars. And we're going to have a state-of-the-art facility in Omaha that will serve the needs of veterans without building a big bed tower. And I think we need to think about what the footprint of VA is going to look like in the future so that we can get state-of-the-art facilities without having to spend the type of money that we've always thought we needed in the past. And so I think together and working more with the private sector, we're going to be able to reshape the system so everybody's proud and veterans are getting the best care.
With that, again, special thanks to you, Mr. Secretary, for joining us. That wraps it up, and we all wish you good luck getting Congress to close 1,100 facilities around the country.
Thank you.